If you've watched my past videos, there's a pretty good chance you know that I'm not the biggest fan of Firefox. From the terrible support for gradients to the lackluster modern web standards to just not performing particularly well and destroying my battery, Firefox hasn't been my default choice since I was back in middle school. That said, Firefox was a good choice for one thing in particular: privacy. Keyword was, because as of yesterday, the Firefox team has decided to make quite the change here. No longer being the private browser, the terms have been updated to specify that when you upload or input information through Firefox, you hereby grant us a non-exclusive, royalty-free, worldwide license to use that information. That is terrifying. We have the Git history of these changes, we have the things they've removed, we have comments from a lot of experts, as well as a follow-up from Mozilla. This has been a wild journey to investigate, and I can't wait to go through it all with you. But first, we have bills to pay. So quick word from today's sponsor. Today's sponsor makes a product that I ship in almost everything I build, and the few times I haven't, I've regretted it immensely. If you don't already know, it's Clerk, the best way to add auth to your apps, especially for us full-stack React devs. It's never been so easy to get auth set up right, and I know this because I've tried almost every other way to do it, and I keep coming back to Clerk. Why would I regret using things that aren't Clerk? Well, every time I do, I'm reminded of all the things you have to build when you don't use them. Things like your sign-in and sign-up components. Things like the user button in profile. You know, the little view you get when you click that icon in the corner. It's so annoying to have to rebuild that for every single app you build. Now they just have it as a component you can install in your app, all part of the Clerk experience. It literally takes 2 minutes to add it to a Next app. It won't just work in Next. They'll handle your auth for pretty much everything. And if you're trying to make auth work on React Native, it's never been easier than it is here. And I'm saying that as someone who's been through it with React Native auth in the past. I'm far from the only person leaning heavily on Clerk nowadays. Lots of other companies, even a few that have had sponsored videos in the past, are betting hard on Clerk because they make life so much easier. There are a lot of annoying flows that I've had to add to my apps over time that Clerk just makes free effectively. Things like multi-tenancy, so you can have multiple users controlling things at one time. Orgs and all of these complex workflows. They even solve multi-account. So if you want users to be able to switch between accounts without signing out and back in, that's just a feature in Clerk. All of these things that would take months to set up before, maybe weeks at best, but you need really good engineers to do it. They just have as features and boxes you can go check in the back end. So it's got to be super expensive, right? Well, not really. You get 10,000 monthly active users for free. And they do a really cool thing with the definition here, where a user isn't just someone going to the page, it's someone who signed up and then came back over 24 hours later. So if you're scared of a huge surge of traffic causing your bill to go nuts, Clerk's not going to have that problem. Users signed in only count against you if they show up again. Stop worrying about auth. Use someone who can handle that all for you. Check out Clerk today at soydev.link/Clerk. Let's start first and foremost from where Brendan sent us here. If you don't know, Brendan Eich is the creator of the world's worst piece of software, JavaScript. Joking. This is the actual license as of right now on the Mozilla site. They have actually made some changes since, but it's still the same permissions. You give Mozilla the rights necessary to operate Firefox. It also includes a non-exclusive, royalty-free worldwide license for the purpose of doing as you request with the content that you input in Firefox. They're trying to play down what this means with the language here, but the content you input in Firefox is everything you do. It's the URLs you type, the search requests you make, the files you upload, the pages you go to. There's a lot of things that this now gives them access to. They don't get ownership. There are other companies whose terms of service are very similar that do get ownership rights some amount through this. Adobe, for example, does reserve the right to use the content you create in their software, which does imply some level of ownership in it. But they do that so they can partner with things like security companies to make sure the things you're doing in Adobe aren't malicious and harmful. I still think it's a terrible license, and I don't like using software that has the rights to do those types of things in places where it doesn't make sense. That said, my browser should not do that. And I'm not even a big privacy guy. I was using a closed source browser for a long time, and I might even go back to one. But this isn't good, especially for the browser that cares so much about privacy. If we look at GitHub a bit, you can see the places where these things actually changed. Here they changed the best privacy to always protected. Only if you're in the Firefox terms of service, though. This is an if statement. So if you're in the Firefox terms, you get always protected. Otherwise, you get the best privacy. So I guess the other Mozilla products have great privacy, but Firefox, you're protected, I guess. Cool. It's cool that this is all open source. They changed this section here too. They deleted the section that said Firefox is independent, not for profit, Mozilla, yada, yada. Unlike other companies, we don't sell access to your data. You're in control over who sees your search and browsing history. And all of that in exceptional performance too. Okay, actually, they did leave that whole section. But they added the if else again. But both of these are about Firefox. So I think this one, despite being in the source, just isn't used for anything. I'm a bit confused. But the important pieces are a little further down. They deleted this part. Does Firefox sell your personal data? Nope, never have, never will. And we protect you from many of the advertisers who do. Firefox products are designed to protect your privacy. That's a promise. It's a promise that you've since deleted. I love this new branding of Firefox. The branding is the only major browser backed by a not-for-profit. The amount of qualifiers in that says everything you need to know. If it takes 2+ qualifiers to make your thing sound appealing at all, it's not a good product. And it's sad, but Firefox just isn't a good product anymore. Okay, apparently the TOS flag is because old users will get the old one, but new users are going to get this new one instead. They posted a blog because everyone was freaking out about this, as they rightfully should. This is terrifying. This is like the most privacy-focused people being told that their data is no longer going to be treated private. We've been listening to the community's concerns with parts of the terms of use, specifically about licensing. Our intent was just to be as clear as possible about how we make Firefox work, but in doing so, we also created some confusion and concern. With that in mind, we're updating the language to more clearly reflect the limited scope of how Mozilla interacts with user data. Yeah, this is the updated version. Mind you, quite a bit different from the one they did yesterday. When you upload or input information through Firefox, you hereby grant us a non-exclusive, royalty-free, worldwide license to use that information. I think they really wanted to get rid of the terminology of use that information, but they changed it to the verse of doing as you request with the content you input in Firefox. Interesting. Obviously, they call it that they don't sell data because they almost certainly legally can't. They're not in a position where they have the rights to do that. But that doesn't mean they're not collecting a bunch of data that people probably don't want them to collect. The reason we stepped away from making blanket claims that we never sell your data is because in some places, the legal definition of sale of data is broad and evolving. Such as in California, they define sale as selling, renting, releasing, disclosing, disseminating, making available, transferring, or otherwise communicating orally, in writing, or by electronic or other means a consumer's personal information by a business to another business or a third party in exchange for monetary or other valuable considerations. And you know what? I'm going to sympathize with them a little bit here because I have problems with this myself. A problem that frustrates me to no end is the fact that ad blocks don't just block ads. I understand the goal of making your browser more private. What I don't understand is why my mom, who installed an ad block so she's less likely to accidentally click on a virus link, can't send error reports anonymously when she uses my software, because the ad block blocks tools like Sentry and like Posthog, which are not tools for advertising to users, for identifying and targeting users. Those are tools for developers and companies to fix things that are broken with their product. And if that is what Mozilla was trying to do here, I can sympathize with that some amount. The catch is their users aren't the people who just installed an ad block to block ads. Their users are people who are choosing an inferior browser because they care too much about something. And the thing they usually care too much about either is or includes privacy. You have to be cognizant of your users when you make changes like this. And when you consider the fact that the only people who could possibly defend the current state of Firefox are people who care more about privacy than actually using the web, it makes sense why they would get this type of blowback. You have to be accepting of the bar that is set by your users. And if you're not, then you're screwed. We have to be cognizant of this too. When I make changes to tools like T3 Chat, we have to make sure that those changes don't hurt the average user who isn't super technically inclined. We also have to make sure that we're building it in a way that when the pokers and prodders, the nerds that hang out places like this, they all will look through everything they can. And even if we have something that is secure, if it looks insecure in terms of they can change it in local storage and it changes what the UI shows, if we don't immediately break things for them, they will presume they just hacked us. So now whenever we make changes, obviously we always made them in ways that kept things secure, but now we have to do them in ways where they aggressively error out when people try to circumvent, rather than defaulting to the right thing, because if we don't do those types of yelling out errors at people, the super technical audience I have will think they just hacked us and post all over the place. Like, look, I just hacked you by changing local storage. You have to understand your users. I made this mistake in a product that had been around for 2 weeks. Actually, I think it was only a week old at that point. Might have only been 4 days old at that point, now I think about it. Yeah. And that was a mistake we learned from and immediately course corrected and will not do things like that going forward. How the hell is Firefox 20 years old and they're making these mistakes worse than they ever have? There's a reason. The people who make Firefox now are not the people who made Firefox in the past. They don't actually understand why people still use Firefox. And part of why they want this data is to figure out who these users are in the first place, because they don't seem to know. Although, there is more here, which is terrifying. In order to make Firefox commercially viable, there are a number of places where we collect and share some data with our partners, including our optional ads on the New tab and providing sponsored sections in the search bar. We set all of this out in our privacy notice. Whenever we share data with our partners, we put a lot of work into making sure the data we share is stripped out of potentially identifying information or shared only in the aggregate, or it's put through our privacy-preserving technologies. Oh God, the new branding. Get the browser that protects what's important. Who's determining what's important, Mozilla? Is it you or is it me? Yeah. On one hand, I actually do sympathize with their goal of getting the data they need to actually identify how people are using Firefox and to improve it. On the other hand, the straight up failure to understand who their users are, how they would read this, how things are perceived externally, that's just one of the most unforgivable failures I've seen in a while. So what do we do? If you're one of those people that was using Firefox because you wanted a real private browser, you do have other options. Things like Brave, as much as I don't love it, because despite being Chrome-based, it has all sorts of weird bugs with things like reCAPTCHA. I'd say 90% of the bug requests we get for T3 chat are people having reCAPTCHA issues on Brave, even though they turned off all the fancy features like shields and fingerprinting stuff. It still just fails randomly because they really want the browser to be private. So if that's the only thing you care about, you don't mind being spammed with crypto stuff here and there, Brave might be fine. You could also use a self-compiled version of Firefox, because this license only applies to builds that you're downloading from Mozilla directly. So if you're using Linux and you grab the Arch user repository bundle, you're probably good. Just make sure you turn off all the Firefox sync stuff, or you use a version that doesn't include it in the first place. Then there are browsers like Zen, the one that I'm using here. Zen is Firefox based, and I believe it has support for Firefox sync, which means theoretically the terms and privacy notice here do apply, at the very least within the sync side. What I don't know is the details of all of that, because I haven't and will never use Firefox sync. I don't like my browser sessions syncing. I treat them as ephemeral. Maybe the history syncing could theoretically be useful, but my phone, my laptop, and my other computers are different devices I use for different things. I don't want the history to sync unless I'm in a really deep run of a Persona game and I want to track all of the confidant listings that I'm using. Other than that, browser sync is not a feature I care about, and I can't imagine there is a good option for browser sync that is genuinely, truly, fully private. You could also just build your own Chromium. It's not that hard to do. Yeah. My personal browser isn't really one. I switch between two at this point. I use Zen for all of my content and a decent bit of my general browsing, but I need good dev tools, and I can't do it with Firefox's dev tools. Go watch my Why I Don't Like Firefox video if you want more info on that. It's not ready for the level I'm shipping at. So I use Vivaldi as my primary browser, themed to all hell to look as much like Arc as possible, because I miss Arc. I have all the same hotkeys bound on both programs. It's good enough. I am happy using Vivaldi as my default for dev work. It's open source and private. It's fine. And then when I want the nice looking, actually well-designed, functioning browser, I use Zen in general. I don't know if I have anything else to say about this one. I never thought I'd see the day that Firefox would stop being the private browser. I also never thought I'd see the day that Firefox would destroy itself as hard as it has been for the last 10 to 15 years. I personally cannot recommend you use Firefox, certainly not the standard Firefox version from their website right now. At the very least, go build your own or grab a fresh build from some open source fork that's well maintained. Don't trust them with your data if they don't even know how to explain what they're doing with it. I got nothing else. Until next time, browse safely.